And welcome everybody to our July NADP monthly member meeting. Always such a pleasure to see familiar faces and new faces, to bring our legal, financial, mental health, and real estate professionals who want to do a better job and try to maintain doing a better job for their divorcing clients. So thank you so much for being here. Also see people that have been with us for years. Grateful for you and all that you do for whether it's your chapters or your clients or just our community in whole. So thank you for being here. One of the things for those of you that if it's your first time or you are attending as a guest, the purpose of our NADP monthly member meetings, as well as NADP in general, is to do two main things. And that's first of all, to give you guys a platform where you can have divorce specific B2B education on how to better serve your clients, because it is so important that you're learning not just about your own field, but about the other fields, the other aspects of the divorce that surely your client is going to go through, and your service will overlap. So there are going to be decisions that you are helping your clients make that involve other areas that you are not well equipped. So sometimes it's just a little nugget of information that is going to change how you guide your clients. So it's very important that you join these calls and have that education. And the second aspect of it is your resources, is connecting with these other professionals. You can't and should not be doing this on your own when you're helping your client, and you should have a resource of educated professionals that you can trust, that you know will take good care of your clients. So we do all of this at the NADP, and that's why with these calls, we do our education first and foremost, and we have amazing education every month. And if you miss some of them and you are an NADP member, make sure that you have an hour free. You have all the recordings, you have access to all of the recordings of our past meetings. And it is such valuable information that I guarantee you're not getting from other places, especially not with the wide range of different industries and topics that we have. So make sure you take the time to do that since it's there for you. And on some housekeeping, by the way, for those of you that know, that don't know, I'm Liz Becker, and I'm the president and founder of the NADP. I also am the developer and senior trainer of the Certified Divorce Specialist program training, which I see many CDS on here. So thank you for coming. And if you are a CDS, you know that attending these meetings gives you 1 credit of continuing education towards your CE requirements for the CDS. And after the presentation, you will receive a code. We will announce a code that you can use to submit it. And if you don't know about the CDS and you want to learn more and you're a guest, stay on with me here after we do the presentation. So we are going to do that presentation at 1 o'clock. Our NADP members will break out into their own networking group. And then all those of you, if you're guests, then you can stay on with me, which leads me to ask you all to please make sure to change your name so that when you go in, and you can just do this by hovering over your little thumbnail, there's 3 little dots that give you the option to rename yourself, and make sure that if you are an NADP member, you put the word member after your name. And if you are a guest, you put the word guest after your name. So this way we'll know who goes where at the end of the presentation. And we also recommend that you put your name and information and where you're from and what you do in the chat box, so that at the end of the meeting, you can save this transcript. And if there's anybody on here that you think would be valuable for you to connect with, then reach out to them. Of course, it's not for just taking all the names and putting it into your newsletter, list. That's not what we recommend. Another thing that we're very, very adamant about at the NADP is building your relationships. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. So it's really focusing on a few individuals that you find would be valuable for you or your clients, and really nurturing those relationships, showing up. It's not about just one meeting, it's doing several one-on-ones and getting to know them. So that's what we say. You should download that, save it, and reach out to anybody that you feel would be a very good connection for your resource, or you would be a great resource for them as well. Anything else about the house coming out? I think I've got all the housekeeping items. If you have any questions, we've got Cybele in the background. You can go ahead and ask questions in the chat. Also throughout the presentation, we have Chloe Oudiz here today. for an excellent presentation, and Nicole will be introducing her shortly, but you can always put in questions in that chat box and we can address them either during or after the presentation. Chloe will let you know. And make sure that you're putting these meetings the third Tuesday of every month in your calendar so that you automatically know to register for next month and join us. It's such a great opportunity for you to be here and connect with others. So I think I've said it pretty much all. If I've forgotten anything, I'm going to pass it over to Nicole and you can fill in the details. But Nicole, who is our VP of Operations and Development, she is going to introduce Chloe to you all.
Thanks, Liz. No, I think you covered it all. Hi, everyone. Really happy to introduce Chloe to you today. Chloe is a certified divorce coach and the author of Don't Screw Up Your Divorce. Her mission is to help people divorce with less conflict so they can come out of their divorce without having destroyed their family. As an alternative dispute resolution professional, Chloe specifically is trained on the intricacies of the divorce process, as well as conflict resolution and negotiation strategies. Chloe works with clients from a variety of backgrounds, but has extensive experience in supporting expatriates and international families who are dealing with the unique situation of living abroad during and after their divorce, with limited local family support, language barriers, and relocation considerations. Chloe coaches in French and in English. Chloe, we're really looking forward to this. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Let me share my screen. So first of all, it's great to meet you all. I don't recognize any names, so I think it is a meet. Let me just move this over. Can you all see my screen? Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about long distance parenting. And this is something that I have spent a lot of time working on with many, many clients over the years, and that I have firsthand experience with myself. So before we dive into the detail, I want to just take a second to introduce myself. And I know Nicole did a great job at that overview, but just to, I guess, as the backdrop for how I came to become a CDC certified divorce coach and why the specialism in expatriate and international divorce. So I am myself an expat, and I come from a binational family. My mother is American, my dad is French. I was born and raised in France, but I've been living abroad for over 20 years, and I've been in England for about 17 years. I'm currently in the south of France, but I'm usually based in England. And I myself am divorced and have two teenage girls. They're now no longer preteens, and have that experience of working with my ex, my co-parent, in a long distance setting. So for the past 6 years or so, he has been abroad. He was first in New York, then in France, and now he is in Estonia. So we have dealt with different scenarios, different time zones, all sorts of challenges with regards to travel and logistics. And we've had to review these parenting plans on a very regular basis every time there was a change. Because of my experience in the business world, I spent about 20 years working in mergers and acquisitions. I was a partner at EY for many years in London. I have a lot of experience in negotiation strategies, and I bring that kind of business mindset to the world of divorce to really help my clients leverage negotiation skills to be able to reach agreements through negotiations rather than through litigation. So I am an ADR specialist and professional, and a lot of my clients come to see me because they want to avoid litigation. They usually want to reduce conflict or keep it to a minimum and separate in a fairly peaceful way. As Nicole said, I coach in French and in English. So I have a lot of clients from the French-speaking world, a lot of clients from the US, from the UK, Australia, really all over the world. And a lot of my clients are in this kind of international context where either they are a binational couple or they're from the same country, but they've moved together to another country. And what typically happens during divorce is that the trailing spouse who has followed the other one to their home or to another place for their job suddenly reconsiders whether they want to be there. Because, of course, upon divorcing, they're a lot less keen to be living in a country or a place that they don't need to be in if they're no longer married to that person. So international relocation is something that comes up a lot. And whether people are choosing to go to court over it or to negotiate among themselves, having a solid plan that is child-centric, but also doesn't alienate the other parent, is very focused on keeping both parents actively involved in the child's life or the children's life, no matter what kind of distance and time zones we're dealing with, to really make sure that those proposals are seen as child-centric and don't antagonize the other person. So when we talk about long distance parenting, there's of course some challenges that come up that I'm sure I will mention that you will of course have anticipated. But there's also a lot of additional challenges that we don't always think about. So I'm going to run through a lot of those, and I'm going to try and point out some of the elements that you as divorce professionals can help your clients be aware of. Because a lot of the time, people just don't think of those things. And what happens is when they're in the eye of the storm and the issue actually arises, they're ill-prepared, it leads to conflict, and usually the children are the one who are caught in the middle. So when you're dealing with long-distance co-parenting, you really need higher investment from both parents. Parallel parenting becomes a lot harder. You do need that collaboration, and I'm going to come to it in a minute in terms of how that translates on the ground. But it does create an extra responsibility, and actually, in a way that's sometimes unexpected to people, it's an extra responsibility for the parent who has the children with them all the time, or most of the time, because they now have to play a very active role in making sure the other parent is involved and maintaining the contact between the children and their other parent. So they actually, while they are the ones who get to keep the kids and be with the kids and could be perceived as the one who get the better end of the stick, they also have a lot of extra responsibilities. And of course, as you can imagine, a lot of the logistics get a lot more complicated when you're dealing with long distance. So for you as professionals to just keep in mind some of the specificities, specific experience is going to be really important. A lot of people come to me because I've helped now hundreds of families through planning for long distance parenting, and really having that experience firsthand, working with others and in my own personal realm is really important in terms of helping people to anticipate some of the challenges they might face. Being sure that you have that expertise to know what specific issues might arise, things that you would not necessarily think about in the context of local co-parenting. Some elements are completely new, others are just much more important. So having that expertise is really key. Like in general in parenting plans, the detail is going to matter a lot. It's going to matter that much more in the context of international or long distance co-parenting. You're going to want to be as specific as possible and make sure that you've really anticipated a lot of the what ifs, which is something that I find couples often forget to think about. They do a lot of the planning for best case scenario as if everything went smoothly, but we all know that life doesn't always go smoothly. Sometimes there's global pandemics, sometimes children are sick, parents need to travel for work, etc. And really what I try to do with my clients is to keep them focused on the children, of course, with always their well-being in mind, and moving away from this idea of this is my time with my child. It's actually your child's time with you, and helping people think of it in a less binary way. And it's a bit tricky because inevitably when you're long distance, it does seem very binary. You can't visit your child every other night. And so there is inevitably that sense that one parent gets the prize and the other doesn't. But there's a lot you can build in to the parenting plans that makes it feel less binary, that allows you to smooth the edges, that takes away that sense of loss for the parent who's left behind, and that gives them still that opportunity to be involved, that makes sure that they are not losing their child just because their child is moving away or because they're moving away. But keep in mind that a lot of the conflicts that typically arise in a co-parenting relationship are that much more exacerbated because of the distance, because the time with the children is that much more precious. It's so much harder to make up at a different time. And so changes in plans, access to technology becomes really important. And the role of the parents, as I said earlier, is really central in making this work. So it really requires a commitment from both parents and quite a bit of responsibility from the parent who is going to be with the children most of the time. So I wanted to talk you through main topics. There's a lot more, but I've tried to narrow it down to some of the biggest elements that are incredibly different in the context of long distance co-parenting. And this is whether, you know, you're living in another state or you're living in a whole other country or a whole other continent. A lot of these implications will worsen as the distance increases, but not necessarily, and they all need to be planned for. So the very first one, which I'm sure is top of everyone's mind, is travel arrangements. And those are obviously something that come up a lot. They have a lot of cost implications. Depending again on how far you're traveling, it can be quite big expenses. You know, I've had families who were co-parenting between Chicago and Singapore, Japan and Germany. You know, we're talking significant expenses in dealing with those airfares. And when the children are small, then comes the question of who's going to take them back and forth. And it's not just the cost of the flight, it's the cost of the accommodation at the other end, because you can't go back and forth in the same day. And so, you know, imagine that the mother is bringing the children to the father. Where's she going to stay overnight while she's waiting for her flight the next day? So all of that has cost implications, logistical implications, and it really requires forward thinking to make sure that you anticipate how that's going to work in practice. The passport question, which is in general a big issue with parents wanting to be the one who holds the passports, gets even more important. When those passports are handed over, becomes an issue that needs to be really carefully thought through. But especially who is going to maintain those passports and potential travel visas. So I had a couple recently where she was based in London, he is in Mozambique in Africa, and the children need a visa to go to Mozambique every time. Now, she has to be the one who takes them to the embassy of Mozambique in the UK every time they travel to see their dad. It costs her money. She has to take a half day off work. It's quite a logistical challenge. She has to book that appointment months ahead of time. So anticipating all those kind of things becomes much more important and creates additional challenges for everybody. So thinking ahead to those potential logistical difficulties, thinking about who's going to be in charge of what, how it's going to work, who's in charge of keeping up the passports, how do you make sure that you don't get yourself in a situation where the children can't travel because their documents aren't up to date. Handover locations are also a big challenge, because there's always a temptation of meeting up in airports or train stations and arranging for handovers in that way, which from the parents' perspective is probably quite practical logistically. But from the children's experience, it's a lot less of a pleasant experience, being handed over like luggage, you know, in the lobby of a hotel or in an airport is not necessarily ideal. So thinking about how you're going to help your children transfer from one world to another world, and sometimes it really is one world to another. You know, if you're going from Singapore to Chicago, it's going to be, you know, there's going to be adaptation for everybody, but especially for the children. Easing them in and making sure that those handovers don't feel too transactional and are really focused on helping the children ease their way in and out of each of those situations. Issues like any kind of changes in plans, but issues in particular with regard to illness of one of the parents or of the children. What do you do in that case? And planning for that. That's the what ifs I was talking about. What do you do if the children are sick and they can't travel? I mean, aside, you know, from COVID, which is a very specific kind of challenge, you know, they can be all sorts of illnesses that make it difficult for children to travel. Or, you know, back to my example with Mozambique, even if there's no problem with them taking a plane, if they're very sick, you might not want them to be in Mozambique because God knows how good the hospitals are there. So there's a lot of changes that can happen with regards to health, also with regards to any other events that happen both in the parents and in the children's lives. But it's not going to be as easy as when you live a few towns down the road and you can just say, well, I won't take them this weekend, you can have them next weekend. The impact of changing the plans, first of all, has cost implications. So who covers those? But also huge logistical implications for everybody. And then the other bit that people often forget about is jet lag, because these children are being brought back and forth. You know, they might be traveling on their own if they're past a certain age, and that's also something to plan for. But even if they're escorted, The parent who doesn't see the children a lot tends to want to have them and maximize their time with them. So say they have them for the school holidays, they're going to say, you know what, I want to have them till the Sunday night because that's as much as I can squeeze in because I haven't seen them in, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, God knows how long. But actually for the kid, coming back on a Sunday night and going to school on the next day with a 10-hour jet lag is really painful. It's hard for them to readapt, first of all. It's really throwing them into the deep end. But also they have to wake up the next day and go to school. And they're probably not feeling great with that kind of jet lag. And in most cases, they haven't slept all night. So again, coming back to that child-centered approach and making sure that you are prioritizing the children's transitions in and out of those environments, it becomes a lot more important than it would, if it was just somebody who, if your ex just lived down the street. So those are some of the things to think about. There are many, many others, but these are some of the topics that I find people often don't anticipate. And then it leads to problems later down the line. So trying to think about how those things are going to work, how they're going to make it work for the children, but also for the parents, and how it's going to take place in practice is going to be really important. At the end of the presentation, I will come to this, but I think it's probably important to flag at this stage, there is a degree of flexibility needed throughout. While I do encourage people to really think about the detail and to really put themselves in the situation of the handover, of the trip, of dealing with those transitions, it's important to accept that there will be a need for flexibility because flights are canceled, they're delayed, trains are delayed, children get sick, there's always going to be changes. And no two families are the same. There's no cookie cutter approach. And so it might be that the formula that you have drafted in your parenting plan doesn't work in practice, and that after a few months you have to review it because actually you start figuring out that it's just not working, either based on the children's feedback or on your own impressions. So travel is the obvious topic that people think of. But there's another one that becomes very important and that, again, takes on a lot more significance than it would if you're co-parenting with somebody who lives nearby. And that's contact outside of visits. Because if there's long distance parenting, then in practice, that means you're not seeing your child very often. If you're very lucky, long distance is just, a state away or, across the English Channel or something like that, and you can possibly see them, on weekends every once in a while. But for most people, it means seeing them during school holidays. And so in almost all scenarios, the way it pans out is that the children are living with one parent and going to school in that location, and then spending holidays with the other parent. That means that staying in touch during the periods where you're not seeing each other becomes that much more important for the children and for the parents. And thinking about what that looks like is going to be something that is really important for people to envisage and to think about. People don't often realize the responsibility that it'll put on the parent who's living with the children, especially if they're young. Acting as that facilitator for contact, they are the enabler in a lot of cases. They need to give their phone to the child. Sometimes the child doesn't know how to work the phone. They have to do it for them. They have to sometimes kind of convince the child to speak to their parent right now, even though they might not be in the mood and they're dealing with something else. So there's a responsibility and really a proactive role for the resident parent in making that contact happen. Now, I always encourage people to be as flexible as possible and to try different scenarios and see how it works. In general, a hybrid model that allows for some set times where the child knows that they're going to speak to their other parent and ad hoc contact is a good model. But again, it depends on the child, it depends on the parent, it depends on the time difference. It may be that actually the time difference is only in the morning, and so the overlap is only in the morning. And actually in the morning, it's a mad rush getting the kids to school, and it's not a good time to talk. So thinking about what's going to work in practice is going to be key here, and thinking about what good looks like with regards to how often, because you don't want that contact to become a burden, either for the parents or for the children. And especially with younger children, they don't really engage very well in a FaceTime call. They don't do talking. They want to play, and they are engaged in the present moment, and they might be playing with something or just tired or hungry or God knows what, and they just don't want to talk to mom or to dad at that time. So accepting that it's not about the other parent, it's not against the parent who's trying to contact them. It's just that they have their little life and they get caught up in the moment. That's also quite a journey for parents to go on, and acceptance with regards to, what works in reality for your children. The format piece is an interesting one, because people always think, and I think as adults we think that way, we think of speaking on the phone when we think of contact. But actually for children, that's not always ideal. And again, it depends on their age, and the older they get, the more comfortable they are just having a chat on FaceTime. But it can, even for an older child, feel a little bit like an interrogation, if they're tired and their parents saying, so how was school? And it's a bit like we even get that when we're living with our kids. You sit down at dinner and you get that one word answer when you ask them about their day. And so actually trying to think of creative ways of engaging with them. If you've got a child who likes video games, play video games online with them. If they like reading, you can read books together. You can play chess together. I mean, the beauty of the time we live in is that there's so much technology out there that there's a lot of ways of engaging that aren't just having a conversation. And so it could be joining them at dinner, literally just putting down the phone on the table, at a slant so they can see everybody, and joining at the dinner table. All of that is an option. It's really for the parents to think creatively of ways to engage in a way that allows the child to feel relaxed and allows them to enjoy those moments with their parents, so it doesn't feel like a chore. A big element and a big consideration that usually is a bit of a contentious one is access to technology. In general, there's always, big debates in families about what age is suitable for children to start having devices. But with the parent being far away, the parent who isn't living with the children is likely to want the children to have technology as soon as possible, because that allows them to reach them. It allows the child to reach out to the parent when they want, and allows the parent to reach out to the child without the other parent acting as a middle person. And so thinking about a suitable age to introduce technology, using technology that allows for the safety that you need. So, they have phones, for example, that aren't smartphones. The kids can't browse or have social media. It literally has a button to call mom, a button to call dad. And you have that very simple phone for them. But introducing technology is going to matter a lot more. And usually the parent who's far away is very keen to see the child enabled so that they can be a more fluid contact. It's not just at scheduled times, but the kid can literally pick up their phone and choose to call mom or choose to call dad. So those are all things that I work with my clients to define up front, and then reiterate as they proceed, to see what's working, what's not, and as the child grows up, because that's also going to influence their ability to deal with these kind of communications. The third consideration is really the co-parenting piece. So this is a lot less about the child and more about the parents collaborating, and that parental responsibility that remains shared even if the parents are not living in the same location. And again, there is a big responsibility for the parent who is living with the children in managing these conversations in a way that includes the other parent. So that means scheduling calls, whether it's a parent-teacher meeting or a doctor's appointment, scheduling it at a time where the other parent is likely to be able to join, or even hopefully, ideally, checking in with the other parent saying, listen, is it okay if I schedule this for Tuesday next week at X time for you to join us in the parent-teacher meeting? Now, sometimes that doesn't work, and you can't dial them in, but then you can record the meetings and send them across. Some parents agree that, routine doctor's appointments, they don't need to be both involved, but when there's a bigger decision to be made, then they will bring the other parent in. All of that are things to think about and to try and anticipate. And again, it requires for both parents to be actively involved in facilitating that. The parent who's far away is going to potentially have to be flexible, maybe, take a call early in the morning or late at night, or interrupt their workday, whatever it might be, to be able to join those conversations. And they might have to accept that there are some of these conversations that they can't join, and that they will have to just have a conversation with the other parent afterwards and understand what happened. And for the parent who's with the children, it's really making that conscious effort to arrange these types of appointments and meetings at a time that is suitable for the other parent, and that allows the other parent to at least have the option to join. from the child's perspective, I'm sure you can all anticipate the value of knowing that both parents are involved in their in decisions relating to their education and to their medical, to their health, because it means that the parent, even though they're far away, they know what's going on. So when the children are speaking to them on the phone, the parent knows what class they're in, who their teacher is. They know what the teacher's saying about their performance at school. They know what the doctor said about, whatever illness they had, or needing braces. They're part of the conversation. The children can really feel the value of having parents who are equally involved without all the downsides of that long distance element. And the last bit is really just a bunch of other things that I wanted to just address, that are more or less important depending on the situation. But dealing with emergencies becomes a challenge. How quickly do you let the other parent know if there is a problem? And think about the scenario in both directions. So the child might live, I'll pick on my other example. They might live in Chicago 90% of the time, but they go to visit their father in Singapore for the holidays. If while they're in Singapore, they're sick, how does that get handled? Do they get sent back to the States? Does the American parent go and see them in Singapore? How quickly does the parent who is staying with the children have to alert the other? What kind of protocols do they want to put in place with regards to the quality of healthcare? Because again, if you're in a developing country, you might say that actually you want to right away airlift the child to another location. So thinking about how you're going to handle those emergencies is going to be really important. The communication piece between parents, I mean, that's key in any co-parenting relationship. But it's even more important then, because one of the two is not going to be privy to the children's day-to-day life. They're not going to have dinner with them on a regular basis and hear about their day at school. They're not going to hear about all the drama and the friends that, that acted nastily and all the things that happened with their teacher and how they want to stop ballet. So the parent who is living with the children has to play a really active role in keeping the other parent abreast. And I usually recommend a structured check-in point between the parents, whether it's once a week, whatever works for them based on their schedules, but really trying to have that built into their routine. Even if sometimes it feels like there's nothing to say, actually just having that half hour or whatever time makes sense scheduled allows you to have just an informal chat about how your kid is doing, what's been happening in their lives. And sometimes there are things that you wouldn't think about and that you wouldn't, proactively reach out to the other parent about. But when you have that time set aside, those conversations end up happening. And so having a bit more structure around that communication, and again, it doesn't have to be a call, it can be whatever format, it could be a weekly email, it could be whatever makes sense, but making sure that that communication is really flowing so that the parent who is far away is not removed from the child's life. And that causes, I've touched upon this a few times, but it does require additional responsibility. And I think we often underestimate that, because the parent who has the children most of the time does carry that extra burden and has to play a very active role. And it's very easy to get carried away and just live your life and forget to keep the other parent abreast and to forget to update them and to involve them in decisions, because you're dealing with, you're putting out 1,000 fires a day and you're dealing with all those little fires. But actually being proactive and really trying to keep that top of mind, the need to keep the other parent involved, to make sure that they are part of the children's day-to-day life, even if they're not there physically. That's really an important element to take into account, and something to recognize as a burden that will eventually become difficult for the parent who is with the children, and thinking about how they're going to make that burden less heavy to carry for the parent is going to be really important. Now, in a lot of cases, the parent who has the children is the one who has asked for the relocation. They are usually the one who has relocated with the children. And so I think in a lot of cases, they see that as a trade-off for having, for taking the children abroad. But with time, that goodwill will sometimes wear off, and it becomes a lot more important for them to stay focused on that task. Special occasions are also difficult to deal with. You're not going to fly back and forth from Singapore if you have, for your children's birthday, or you might, but you want to think about how that's going to happen, and how you're going to address that if you can't come? How can you still have a celebration despite the distance? How can you, once again, leverage technology in a way that's going to allow you to feel like you've been part of your child's birthday? I'm picking on birthdays, but it could be Christmas, Easter, Halloween, any of it. So really thinking about how you can involve the other parent in those occasions. And it is going to be really, really challenging for people, but it's something to try and anticipate and plan for. And I guess related to this is the next point around cultures and languages, because in a lot of cases, there will be two different languages in each different country. Sometimes the parents have a different native language. And for the parent who is not with the child all the time, there can be a fear that their cultural heritage is going to somehow become, it's going to lessen. It's going to be less of an influence in their children's lives. And so that's, I relate that as well to special occasions, because you will have national holidays, you will have religious holidays, all sorts of events that are going to matter a lot to one parent and might not be relevant to the other parent. But again, if you're trying to maintain that connection between your children and their parent who's far away, making sure that their culture is part of the children's day-to-day life is going to be really, really important. So whether it's maintaining language skills or having the national dish from the other parent's country on a regular basis, watching movies from that country, or celebrating holidays, again, the parent who's living with the children is going to have to be really conscious of that and try and anticipate and plan and really curate a lot of these events to make sure that the other parent's way of celebrating is represented, and that the children ultimately take away that richness of having that dual culture, being bilingual potentially. All of that is a richness for the children, and even though it may seem a bit complicated and a bit difficult at times for the parent who is trying to encourage that, it's ultimately your child-centered approach and benefit. And then the last bit is one that gets very tricky. It's the introduction of new partners. And that's tricky in a lot of situations anyway, especially when one of the parents has been left for somebody else. But even if they haven't, when inevitably one of the parents will meet somebody else, and the introduction of a new partner becomes a lot more challenging, because you don't have the luxury that you have when you live nearby of first going out for coffee, and the children just meet that new person for an hour or two, and then potentially they spend a bit more time with them, and then after a few months, the new person spends the night when the children are there, and 6 months later they might go on holiday with you. All of that kind of off-ramp doesn't exist as much when you're dealing with long distance, because the parent who is abroad, they're living their life in real time. But from the child's perspective, it's all very much slowed down, because they only see that parent every 6, 8, whatever number of weeks. And so the parent who's met somebody new might feel like they've been in this relationship forever. They might have been with this person for 6 months, a year, and to them it's a very serious and established relationship. But for the children, it might be the second or third time they've seen that person. And so easing into that transition is going to be really important. And also keep in mind that for the children, this is one of the few times they see their parent. They don't want to share them. So there's a lot of psychological aspects around the introduction of that new person, having to share this parent that they already don't see very much with another person when they're visiting them, can be really difficult for children to accept. So trying to think about what good looks like in terms of the introduction of a new partner, of course, trying to phase them in as much as you can, but really for the parent who has a new partner, and particularly if it's the parent who's far away, really trying to put themselves in the children's shoes, to look at it from their perspective and think of it from their point of view of how many times have I seen this person? How comfortable do I feel going on holiday with them if it's the second time I've seen them? And yes, they may have been with mom or dad for a year, but for me, it's still somebody I don't know and I'm not comfortable with. So thinking about all of those implications and trying to anticipate those, especially before the new partner appears, because that's when people are able to think more clearly and usually more rationally, and they can have a better evaluation of what a good outcome looks like. Whereas once they've already met the person and they're all excited about that relationship, sometimes they become a lot less rational around what's best for the children. So those are really the main points I wanted to address. As I said, there's a lot of other things that need to come into account, but these are some of the biggest issues that I've seen arise over time and that I encourage people to think about. They don't necessarily have to document them in their plan if they don't want to, but having thought about it and having a conversation about what that would look like and how they would go about it, just to make sure that they're on the same wavelength, I would say that would be the bare minimum to encourage. So in terms of long distance co-parenting, I'd say, boiling it down really to three pillars that would really be the keys to success. The first is specialist advice, working with somebody who has experience in international divorce, in long distance parenting is going to be key because they're going to know and anticipate a lot of the issues that you wouldn't necessarily think of otherwise. The parenting plans need to be different. And I know there's a lot of parenting plan templates out there on the internet. They're all great, but there's a lot of things that need to be added when you're talking about long distance. I mean, you've seen all the extra considerations that I mentioned. Those would not typically be documented, or they wouldn't be as important. So really thinking about what does my parenting plan look like in this international context, and what are the additional points that I need to think about that go beyond what would be traditionally included in the parenting plan. And then, as I mentioned earlier, flexibility and regular reviews. Kids are going to grow up, things are going to change. Oftentimes, I see the parent who is living abroad is a serial expat and will move around every 3, 4, 5 years. And that requires those plans to be rejigged because they might be moving continents or they might be moving a lot closer. So all of that requires flexibility and just accepting a degree of trial and error because everybody's going to be looking for their footing. Children are going to try and find their way through this new dynamic, and the parents are going to be getting used to it. So allowing for flexibility and reviews, especially at the beginning, until you've found a bit more of a routine, until you've ironed out all the crooks and nooks and you've kind of faced some of the biggest challenges and been able to resolve them. It's going to require everybody to be a bit flexible and open-minded. And while you document all this and try to anticipate it, things will happen that you haven't thought of, and there will be changes that you have to deal with that will require those kind of reviews. So before I move on to questions, I just wanted to highlight here, I put the QR code for my website. I have built a long distance parenting plan template that I share with my clients, and that's available on my website to help people specifically with this kind of planning. So back to my earlier point and the fact that there are a lot of things to anticipate and to document and to even just discuss that you wouldn't necessarily look at if you were local. All of that is encapsulated in this plan, and it's really a really good way for people to have that checklist, make sure they've thought of everything. And I encourage people to use it, whether they're negotiating amicably among themselves or whether they are going to trial. They're going to need either way to have a robust plan and to be able to articulate a plan that is child-centric and that shows the involvement of the other parent. So no matter what the context, taking the time to build that out, to put it on paper, to agree among yourselves what a good solution looks like, at least at that stage, is going to make a massive difference. Here are my contact details, which I'm sure will be shared with you afterwards, but I'd love to open the floor for questions because I'm conscious I've been speaking a lot for the past 45 minutes.
Great information, Chloe. Please everybody take a screenshot so we can have you close down the screen share and so we can see everybody's faces. And also Chloe's information will be on the website. Such fascinating information. The whole time I'm thinking I raised my kids in Connecticut, and when their dad moved 2 towns away, it was very hard on my kids and very stressful and felt like an eternity away from home. And I'm very curious. I don't know how much, I'm sure it could be a whole topic in itself of how hard this is on children. Like I said, my kids, their dad was 20 minutes away, and it may as well have been Europe because that's how they felt. So,
it doesn't really matter in a lot of ways the distance, as long as it makes the other parent far enough that they're not easily accessible anymore. From the child's perspective, it's not a huge difference. It's from a logistical perspective that it does add complexity, but they're losing that ongoing contact with the parent, aren't they?
Yeah, and I'm sure it has to do with the parent itself. I think my ex could have done a much better job. So sometimes it really falls on that parent being a good communicator and staying in touch.
Yeah.
We'll open it up to everybody's questions. I see Aviva, your hand is up first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chloe. A lot of great information. Are there specific attorneys that deal with international, or is everybody, who, like, for example, I don't know if the laws are different, but, here in New York, it's like I have to deal with a New York attorney for my New York clients, and then New Jersey attorney for my New Jersey clients, and Connecticut attorney for my Connecticut clients. So in
Yeah,
like,
in Europe, it's very common. I know a few in the States as well. But there are some lawyers who specialize in international divorce, and the big issue that usually comes up very early on is jurisdiction choice, and so they will have usually an expertise around some of the challenges that people might face with regards to jurisdictional decisions, and they'll usually have contacts in other countries to help have those conversations and understand which jurisdiction is best. But in general, in the context of the overall divorce, it does help to work with somebody who has that expertise, because there will be some things that come up, even just immigration issues. Sometimes you lose your visa when you divorce. You're there as on a spousal visa, and you lose that. There's tax implications. There's all sorts of challenges that come up. So yes, there are a number of lawyers who have that specialty. What I haven't yet found is a mediator who has that specialty, which is a shame. And I do believe I'm the only divorce coach who has that experience.
thank you.
Jamie and then Joe.
I have a quick question in terms of, like, once an agreement has actually been made, how difficult is that to then go back and make any adjustments? Because again, difference international versus states, like, I know it's very difficult to change, child related issues.
Yeah.
And obviously, sometimes it's like I think this is the case with all divorces, but sometimes you just want to get it off your plate, come to an agreement. And especially when you have very little ones, you're not always thinking about what that looks like as they become teenagers and,
Yeah.
move into these tech passages, and options. But how
Mhm.
difficult is that? I have one of my very best friend has gone through divorce, and the resident parent is in Ireland.
Oh, wow.
And so their divorce is finalized, but like they're learning that there are things that it really doesn't give them that kind of ability to have some of the parenting rights we feel, that you would expect to have.
Yeah, I mean, in general, it's the children's residence that dictates the law that applies. A lot of the people I work with use the parenting plan as an informal agreement between the two of them, and it's not, they don't turn it into a court order, they don't make it legally binding, but some people do. Start with a plan and then submit it to the court to make it into an order. And so part of that, the answer will depend on whether they formalized it and made it legally binding, or whether it's just a gentleman's agreement between the two of them. But in all cases, these arrangements always evolve. And even if you get a court order, that's going to be at a very specific point in time. And as you said, when children grow up, new partners, new children are born, etc., it throws spanner in the works, and anyway needs to be reviewed. So that's why it's really important for people to agree that there will be a degree of flexibility required, because stuff happens. And unless your kids are 15 and or almost grown up, you're going to have changes.
I am a new member, and this is my first call, and this was completely invaluable. Thank you so much. Super niche. You mentioned, connectivity, doctor's appointments, keeping in the loop. Have you had any experience, especially with minors, with regard to psychiatrists, psychologists, and what those experiences have been like, just given where there might be some animosity towards one parent versus another, and how, if you've seen that experience, how's that played out?
You mean when the children goes to see a therapist?
Right. So consider, like, it's a doctor, right? Like a
Yeah.
psychologist, and you'd want to keep both parents informed if it were a minor.
Yeah.
Has that played out before in your universe, and how has that been
Yeah.
dealt with?
I don't know that it's any different than any other doctor. I mean, at the end of the day, you want both parents to know what's going on with the kid, whether it's a physical ailment or a mental one. But again, it really requires that conscious effort to make those appointments happen at times where the other parent can join. And if they opt out, they opt out, but you do want to make sure that you're giving them that opportunity, so that if there is resentment, this can't be added to the list of wrongdoings that you haven't kept them informed. But also with regards to my point on communication between the parents, they're going to need to be, they should be speaking to each other on a regular basis, and they should be making sure that they are keeping each other abreast of what's going on in the children's life, and that might include their mental health. It could be their social life. It can be a lot of different things that impact their little lives at that stage.
I wonder, I have a question, Chloe, because that's interesting that you brought that up, Joe, because I'm wondering, since a child could live in two different places, or parents could be that you mentioned, touch on this, it's so culturally different, that when dealing with therapists, that would be reflective on that as well. And I'm wondering, are there cases where a child would have therapists in both countries? Because it's very
Never seen that, but I guess, it would depend also, in a lot of cases, they are principally in one country. And so actually, if you're going for 2 weeks every 6 weeks, you're not going to have a therapist there anyway. But that comes up in all spheres of life, Liz. But, with regards to education decisions, I've seen it happen a lot, with families where I have one family where he is Spanish and she's Chinese. And the Chinese have a very different approach to education to the Spaniards. And so I'm sure that was a challenge during their marriage, and it certainly is now. And so, even education decisions get very difficult, and, you can have religious implications that, mean that one parent might disagree, for the child to have surgery or whatnot. But that's going to be the same challenge if they're living next to each other than if they're far away. It just might be more of a sore point for the parent who's far away if there is that distance.
I think it's more the parents that need the therapy in these situations, quite honestly. Children usually tend to figure out a way to adapt, even though not in situation. So I think it's the parents that have, like as Nicole mentioned, even when you have, you're going through divorce. And I love this presentation because, and kudos to you. And we've seen many presentations because it was so super niche. But the information that you gave is so valuable, even if it's a local co-parenting situation. It's just amplified when it's international. And there's these other things that we should think about and address, or even think about that we don't address in local co-parenting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Because they all really play such an important part. So thank you for this. Really, really excellent information. Anybody else have any questions or any comments or wanted to add anything in? No?
It's not just, I talked a lot about international examples, and I think that's the nature of being in Europe. And you don't have to go very far to be in another country. But within, I've had clients who were within the US. I've had clients, where I had one who was in Canada, the husband was he was in Canada, she was in California. Long distance is not necessarily international. It's really that the arrangements that come into play as soon as the parent is just far enough that 50-50 arrangement's not really on the table. And so you start having those additional things to think about.
Yeah. And I think when Aviva brought up about the lawyer and specific and international, I would assume that any lawyer that is specializing in international would also have resources within the United States or the country that they're dealing with.
Yeah.
That would be ideal, right? Just like on our concept, like, you want to, people always ask me when they're trying to find an attorney or they have a client trying to find an attorney. And I always say that the best way to find an attorney and who to work with is to know that that person works well with the other attorney, that they have some kind of relationship with the other attorney. That's going to ultimately, doesn't matter if they're sharks or if they're fight or they know, it's like, that is the ideal situation, that they've worked together before, they know how to handle the situation. And so I would think that this would be something good for international lawyers as well. That may be something we should look more into, Chloe, and see get more international lawyers, good resources and connections with our amazing members as well and community. So yeah, I thought this was fantastic. So last chance, speak now or forever hold your peace. Anybody have any final questions? No? Okay, well, we want to
not really forever. Feel free to reach out. You'll have my contact details, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate. If you're not sure whether I'm the right person to help one of your clients, reach out. I'll give you an honest answer. And if you ever have any clients that are struggling with these kind of arrangements, you can always pop me a question by email or WhatsApp or whatnot.